And my very first guest tonight is a man who proudly served as Deputy Prime Minister under John Howard. He's a man of enormous integrity, a widely loved Australian who's actually risen above the fray in his time, both inside and outside Parliament. He left politics with more friends than he entered it, and that's a rare virtue. He's a man who holds deep religious convictions and is following the culture debates and debate over freedom of religion very closely, runs a podcast and is serving his community in numerous ways. I'm talking, of course, about the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, John Anderson AO. Words don't suffice to capture the enormity of the contribution this man made to our public life. He's in every respect a decent and good Australian. His Conservative credentials are absolutely above reproach, and he's got a very important voice in the discussion about what Australia's Conservatives should be taking from the Trump presidency and preserving, and what elements of it we might need to review and discard. He joins me tonight from just near Tamworth at his family home, where he's got his own broadcast facility. John Anderson, welcome as the very first guest on the McGregor Angle. I am deeply privileged to have you join me.
No, the privilege is mine, Catherine. I'm deeply honoured. And I listened with great interest to what you had to say. Now, we as Australians are primarily concerned, I think, with our own country and the way in which we go about our lives in it. But as you say, we have to be very aware of what's happening internationally. And I think you made a very important point. Whether you were a Donald Trump supporter or detractor, I think it's really important to recognise that he was in many ways the product of a deeply divided America. I think it's also fair to say that the events surrounding his loss, whether you think it was fair or not, and the new president's election, unfortunately, are likely to continue the deep polarisation and the deep feeling of alienation amongst many people in the middle in America. We need to learn the lessons from that and not import it, because I'm deeply concerned that the early signs in the Biden administration reflect the fact that he has been dragged badly to one side of politics. He's made a mistake that I don't believe any of our better Australian leaders would have made in recent years. He's set out to sort of kick the whole thing off in a way that creates the impression that those people who continue to vote for Trump, an incredible 70 million of them, really are deplorables. He should have gone on an extensive listening trip. And a very good friend of mine, himself a Democrat, Warren Farrell in America, has said just that. If he wants to reunite America, he needs to go to the red states and listen to why those Americans who so strongly supported Donald Trump feel so disaffected.
Indeed, and John, I think we discussed this earlier in the week. He's got to drop this impeachment process against the former president. That smacks of vindictiveness, and it looks to me, on its face, unconstitutional. But I'd like to put to you something that touched deeply. Only last month, I believe, you delivered the 8th John Howard named oration at the Menzies Research Centre and eloquently summed up the very issue we're canvassing tonight. I'll just put back to you what you said that night.
We face another, perhaps to my way of thinking, even deeper problem than identity politics. It's the erosion of the foundations of belief in the human dignity that made Western progress possible in the first place. Identity politics seeks to overthrow social conventions, institutions, rules and practices. The tearing down of statues is a powerful reflection of the determination to reject the notion of Western civilisation.
That is a wonderful encapsulation of the kind of dynamic that did produce Donald Trump as president. And what's your fear about that being imported into our body politic, John? I know you're somewhat pessimistic, aren't you, that it's already taken root?
Well, it has. We are, as a people, much more relaxed and laid back in terms of the way we relate to one another traditionally, perhaps than the Americans. I hope that doesn't mean that we're apathetic about the culture wars. Sometimes I think it does. But we don't have that terrible degree of atomisation and polarisation yet. It's here But we need now to pull ourselves up and say, we don't want to go where the Americans have gone. As indeed, I pay this respectful remark about America. The great majority of Americans, I don't believe, want to go there anyway. The research tells you fairly clearly that around 2/3, perhaps 70% of Americans feel very alienated, very lost, very concerned by this deep polarisation at the political extremes. And I think the same is true in Australia, but we need to pull it up now before it gets any worse. And I think of the leaders that have struck the greatest chord with Australia over the time that I was involved in politics. The reality is that Bob Hawke was extraordinarily good at reaching out to the other side. I was struck by that. He was Prime Minister when I was sworn in a by-election in 1989. He went out of his way to connect with me as a person. He recognised that we had a job to do, each of us. We had different perspectives. We might not agree on policies, but we were both Australians. And the Australian tradition, following in, if you like, I think the foundational beliefs and values of our Christian heritage, is to recognise the worth and the dignity of the other person, whether you agree with them or not. Identity politics throws that out the door, and it sets one group of people with one set of beliefs and priorities and attitudes towards activism against another group, and somehow places the dividing line between good and bad, whether it's good and bad Americans or good and bad Australians, between the group, without a recognition, and this is really relevant to what's happening in America, that no one gets it all wrong or all right. And as my Democrat friend made, you can find it on my website, very interesting commentary from a man who was a Biden supporter, a Clinton supporter. But he makes the point that Biden should have been looking for the things that Trump got right. Here's a simple little example. He signed an order preventing the continuing of the building of the wall, the contentious wall, because Trump did it. But Trump didn't start it. Obama did. So why was Obama's policy so bad that it now had to be overthrown simply because Trump continued it? I just use it as an illustration. And you get this problem now that having the media in particular, mainstream media, honourable exceptions, of course, but overwhelmingly in America, you can see that they want to describe everything that Trump did as bad and wrong when it simply wasn't. They are now determined to say that everything that President Biden does is right and proper, and plainly it won't be. And that's this problem. Once you draw the dividing line between good and bad in the wrong places, you lose the ability to form realistic judgments and to take people with you. And the bulk of people in America, I think, really feel that. I think Australians want our leaders to lead out. No.
And John, I guess,
and we've had leaders of faith, so we haven't yet got into that state. We shouldn't go there.
Yeah, and look, we're sadly getting very short of time. This is a topic for another night. We can go into freedom of religion in more detail, but you make the very good point that as we've eroded and become more secular, we've now more or less transported the quality of sin into our public debates. So people are not able to have civil disagreements. They actually have to annihilate people because they're evil if they disagree. Hence the cancel culture that we saw this week with, say, Margaret Court, for instance. She was driven out of the public square for adhering to a teaching on marriage that when Julia Gillard got her AC, right through her prime ministership, she supported the same definition of marriage that Margaret Court and you do. And there was no outcry. It says it all, doesn't it?
Well, the trend lines are there. That's the point. And we would be very foolish not to learn the lessons from how bad it can get if you lose control of it, if you continue this trajectory. We have to reject this idea that has now emerged very strongly in progressive forces that our history is all evil, it's all bad. It wasn't all good. But show me somebody who's written a better book on personal freedom than the Western model, based as it was, of course, in that unique but unbelievably important concept that all have worth and dignity. As Bob Menzies put it, all souls are equal in the eyes of heaven. That gave rise to the rule of law for all. As Theodore Roosevelt so beautifully put it in America, no one should be above the law and no one should be beneath it either.
John, that is a wonderful note upon which to finish, and let's hope that the President decides not to continue the impeachment process and thereby shows that law does matter. Thank you for taking time to join us. We'll have to throw to an ad break now, but there's so much more we could continue with. Thank you for opening the batting tonight, and Brian Booth sends his love. All the best.
Well, please return it. He's a very great Australian. All best to you and to your program and to reasoned debate based around evidence and respect for one another. That's what we need in these very dangerous times. Let's not forget these are dangerous times. We need to find our heads, not lose them.